Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Jenny Beal, and this is the Living and Not Knowing section of the Awareness podcast. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Ellen Emmet. Many of you will know Ellen from the Awakening Body classes she offers based on the Kashmir Shaivism tradition. But for those of you who don't, I'll tell you a little bit about her background. So Ellen's deepest intuition was confirmed when she met her teacher in the Nondual tradition, Francis Lucille. Hearing his words, she recognized the eternal, limitless, and universal nature of our shared reality. Over the years, this understanding has continued to unfold and to touch all levels of experience. At the very same time, Ellen has never ceased to delve into the depths of her human experience, seen and unseen, thirsting for a wholeness and connectedness which appeared to be lost or obscured. This unstoppable quest brought her to therapy, Jungian workshops, later Jungian analysis, dream work, authentic movement, and creative writing. More and more, she senses that each of our lives is a journey of revelation and integration, including its darker crossings, through which the face of truth can shine uniquely and anew, wedding us to our direct experience and connecting us to the great family of creation. Today, Ellen offers meetings and retreats in the Awakening Body, a direct exploration of experience sourced in the non-dual tradition of Kashmir Shaivism, authentic movement, and self-inquiry. In addition, she has a private practice as a psychotherapist and facilitator of authentic movement. So, hello, Ellen. It's so lovely to see you. And I remember when I first started following the direct path, by chance, I came across some meditations for exploring the body, and it was strange at the time because they didn't seem to fit with non-duality. I couldn't understand why that approach seemed so important to me. I just knew that it was. There was a strong pull towards exploring the body. And then ultimately that led to my joining your classes in Oxford. So can you explain the connection between the self-inquiry, higher reasoning approach of Advaita Vedanta and the yoga of sensation and perception that's the focus of your teaching?
Wow. Some part of me says, no, I don't think I can explain it. But, maybe that explains something. Just saying, I'm not sure I can explain it. There's definitely a connection, but a deep connection, because obviously, for me, the body was the first sort of realm within which I explored my experience. And I wasn't so sort of drawn to, to reasoning and inquiring philosophically, whereas I think you're the opposite, Jenny. Possibly
Yes,
you're
yes.
so, but yet when you encountered the bodily exploration, the tactile exploration of the truth, you resonated and you felt that there was something there. So it was very instinctive in you. You knew.
Very
Even
instinctive, yes.
yeah, and I mean, of course it is, because if we are, the body and mind are made out of the same mysterious stuff. So the body, the body is not a sort of an inanimate object, mechanical thing. And in our culture we often think of the body that way, and so we can't explain to ourselves why it might be an experiential avenue for exploring the truth, because it's just a body. Just do things with the body. Well, no, the body is the body. Well, I've still to this day have a hard time defining the body. It's very difficult to define, but I can use poetic language. It's a place of feeling. It's a place of tactility, a place where we can actually discover that in fact I am not a finite object. I'm not quite sure where I'm located. I don't know where I begin and where I end. So when I met my teacher Francis, I first I heard his words, and they were philosophical words. He said something very a line of reasoning, and I had a glimpse. But I want to say that the glimpse is always accompanied by an echo in the body. It's not like there is a divide between the body and the mind. There isn't. So it's always both that are implicated in a moment of understanding, that are sort of touched. But depending on each of our characters, I guess, some of us will tend to favor the higher reasoning, the telling ourselves what happened, formulating, and we will be in love with that. And actually I was as well. But then others, and I was as well, and I'm sure you were or became that more and more, will also want to sit on a yoga mat or on a carpet or on a whatever and feel the understanding. To begin with, maybe with some guidance, which Francis provided with his yoga explorations and the whole Kashmir approach. Yes. Provides a framework. Sometimes just being in the presence of another who's sitting quietly, or just being in a sort of contemplative mode, but you could say on a feeling level, it speaks volumes about our true nature, or taking a walk in nature. So anyway, I'm already rambling. Interrupt me.
I mean, Francis called the body awareness approach that you and he offer post-enlightenment sadhana, meaning that it's taught after basic self-inquiry and a liberating glimpse, and that was my own approach. But I'm wondering, is it possible to actually start with the body, to start inquiry, start the spiritual search with the body?
Well, I think it can happen that way. I think. I mean, I know people who had so-called awakenings that were not conceptual at all. They suddenly were sitting on a beach and had a very strong phenomenal experience that was much more body-based than mind-based, you could say. But then, of course, if you don't, so then the mind might just reach for whatever explanation it has at its disposal. So it doesn't mean then that there's an understanding at the level of the mind and an articulation at the level of the mind of our true nature. So we might have a feeling of our true nature, and then the explanation is completely sort of other. So I guess it depends. I don't really know. I'm sure it is possible. I think it's possible for the body, for the realm of feelings and tactility to be what sets you on the path and gives you an intuition, orientates you towards the truth. Also, because suffering is often what sets us on the path, and suffering is often felt as a feeling in the body.
Yes.
So it's almost like, yes, it's like a flower that's looking for the light. The body is also looking for relief and for its sort of natural home, which is expansion, openness, peace.
Yeah, so maybe if people start with the body, then naturally they will come back to the mind at some point. Yeah.
Maybe they won't. Maybe some people who work sort of in a more simple, or live in a more simple way in nature with animals, and are not, our culture is more complex, but there may be ways of living that are less complex, where you just naturally live the understanding, but you never formulate it because it's not, I don't know, because it's not what happens.
Yeah.
But But then, as you say, I think it could be that you go down the avenue of the body, and then you're lucky to meet a teacher such as Francis who speaks, who does both. So then you hear the words, and they are like, well, they blow the mind, you know. So
Yes.
then you're so lucky. You're so lucky you have both.
Yes, yes.
We're very lucky to have had that sort of complete exposure.
Yeah. It's often said that the aim of the direct path is happiness, and I know Francis says this, but I've always felt that for me, truth and authenticity come first, and those are kind of prerequisites for happiness. If there's not truth and authenticity, then I feel there can't be happiness in my experience. It may not be the same for others, but I wonder whether you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, I always struggle with the word happiness. Is a bit simplistic for me. You know, I do understand what Francis means, and I think it's an attempt at sort of reducing, like you know, when you're cooking some delicious sauce and it reduces and reduces, and he arrives at this word happiness. But yeah, but even the word truth or the word freedom, they're very big words. So, but yes, so what am I trying to say? I think my first word, the word that first resonates is freedom, possibly freedom and truth. I would agree with you. And happiness is a bit too loaded for me. I like peace. I like peace. I like peace. I don't rest on one word. I don't think I'm somebody who does that. Sometimes if I hear Francis speak that notion that he speaks about how we all seek happiness, if he does it in a certain way with a certain tone from a certain silence, then at that moment it speaks to me 100%. Yes, I understand. Yes. But at another moment, if he speaks of freedom and he does it in that way that he can, or somebody else, not just Francis, then yes, it's freedom, you know.
Yes, yeah.
But they do each have a flavor that's different. So for you, it's first truth, authenticity. You said that's
authenticity. Yes, yes. It's always been like that for me since I was a child.
I
think
I know what you mean about. I mean, I feel what you mean. Authenticity. It's like you can't not follow a sort of like a dog on a scent. But what you're on the scent for is in a way is for truth, or for you, for what's right for you, what wants to come forward, what wants to, and so that could be called authenticity or truth. And it requires a quality of freedom, because often you're told, you know, here's who you are and here's what you do and here's what you know. And so in order to sort of allow for this other possibility, there needs to be freedom.
Yes, you're right. You can't be authentic without freedom.
No,
Yes,
and
all
it's not something you
interconnected.
yeah, and you don't manufacture the freedom. In fact, you
No.
might be terrified and think, "Oh my God, no! I want to just live a quiet. I want to do what I'm told," and then suddenly you find yourself going completely off piste, and you realize there's a much stronger dynamism that sets you in motion, and I think there is the junction where you fall in, where something is fallen in love with, and it's quite mysterious, and we use words, and we wonder what it is we're falling in love with. But you could also wonder who is falling in love with whom, you know. Is it me, Jenny, Ellen, falling in love with, or is it some mysterious force sort of
Yes.
taking possession of our body minds, and we have to surrender, and yeah, we can use lots of words, and I think each one of us has to find the word that really lands, not always take it from our teachers.
Yes. Yeah.
And be courageous, even, if happiness doesn't quite fit. I had to wrestle because I was thinking, it doesn't quite fit happiness, because I often didn't feel happy, and yet I felt very much the sense of truth and freedom. Happiness was a bit more dodgy.
Yes, yes. I think one of the reasons I feel happiness a little bit dodgy is because there's an awful lot of teachings out there that claim to be non-dual, but they're mainly about practices or techniques that bring one to a peaceful state of mind. And the mantra meditation that I used to practice is just one example. But I noticed that it became a sort of avoidance mechanism. It was a way of
Right.
suppressing feelings.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Suddenly, the word happiness seems to forbid a whole realm of, for me, it seemed like, okay, I have to be happy. And then every time I felt an invitation to explore or turn towards layers of experience that were seemingly not about happy, I felt maybe I was veering off the spiritual path, and I really had to wrestle with that.
Yes.
Yeah. And as you say, it would be very misleading to think that, for example, the body explorations are meant or sort of or practices in order to reach a state
Yes.
of
Yeah.
happiness.
Yes.
So Francis, of
Ultimately,
course,
yeah, yes. I mean, that was one of the key things I learned from Francis, that we need to investigate and understand the cause of our misery rather than sit with an unpleasant feeling. Yeah.
exactly,
Mm.
exactly. And of course, the happiness he means is a happiness that is prior to any experience and includes unhappiness. In a way,
Uh,
it's not a happiness that is opposite unhappiness. But, it takes time to understand all that. And the words can be misleading sometimes.
yeah.
Um, whereas truth doesn't have that sort of pitfall. Like, I think when I hear truth, I don't think about lies. I think just truth. But with happiness,
Exactly. Yes.
I think, oh, suffering.
Mm.
What about suffering? I feel protective of unhappiness.
Yes. Yes. I've heard you mention the need for both the vertical and horizontal exploration, and can you say a bit more about that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you were saying, when you introduced me, you mentioned I was a therapist, and I have explored
Mm.
quite a bit in the realm of the psyche or in the realm of psychology. So for me, I don't, not everybody's like that. Some people, it's enough to investigate their true nature and then really just keep coming back to that very so-called vertical understanding. But the verticality, I guess, I don't think I sort of am the first one who uses that sort of representation, but
Mm.
the vertical would be the here and now. And
Mm-hmm.
so we sit on our meditation cushion, we close our eyes, the circumstance of our lives go quiet, our relationships, our activities, everything goes quiet, and we come to just the contemplation of the moment by moment experience. And after a glimpse, or after a few glimpses, or after many, many glimpses, and after exploring the understanding at the level of the mind and all this, quite easily, possibly, we can realign. The body mind sort of relaxes, and there's a very easy, I want to say, or quite effortless alignment with the understanding, the felt understanding of our true nature. Not necessarily easy, but let's say that it's a quite a direct path when we're in that contemplative, meditative, or in the presence of our teacher. The orientation is in the here and now, to the subject of experience.
Mm.
And we're not doing anything more than just inquiring into what is it that perceives my experience, for example, or things like that. Anyway, but when we step off our cushion and out of the sanctuary of the teaching, lots of things happen. Suddenly the body mind is in full shape, and it doesn't mean that the belief in separation is in operation. It doesn't mean that we re-adopt the belief that I am a separate entity, but we have to contend with the person that we each are, the individual, and the conditioning. And I have always been interested in that, and also the hidden aspects of our experience, the unconscious, so-called. I want to say the hidden laws of, just as physicists and scientists explore the so-called inanimate universe, and they are forever looking for the laws of this cosmos, and if they happen to be spiritually inclined or have had a glimpse, then what they're exploring is the God. They're exploring God's mind, you could say, but they're exploring it in action. They're exploring God's creative mind, because if they're just exploring God's nature, then they sit on the cushion. But if they're exploring God's creative mind, then they don't want to go to the meditation cushion. They want to. It's almost like God wants to discover God itself through its own creativity. And for me, psychology is not an endeavor for the ego, like to feel better. It's an exploration of the very same laws, the laws of creation on the inside, you could say. Oh, here's a cat. In other words, you're really. Do you understand what I'm saying, Jenny? Because I get lost.
Yes, I do. It's exactly how I felt that, often it's said that psychology is not really relevant to the direct path, because that we're not our minds.
Mm-hmm.
But exactly as you said, our minds work according to patterns, and those patterns I see absolutely as equivalent to the patterns of the physical world. So patterns of the mental realm and patterns of the physical realm. And if you think of everything that science has brought to us, the possibility of us talking now,
yes,
why not explore the patterns of the mental realm? I'm not convinced that psychologists have got there yet in the same way that scientists have, but maybe they will.
I think you need to read Jung. And actually, well, I'm not, and I think you're probably more drawn to science. So it might be that
yes.
But I really think that Carl Jung, and actually, you know who Bernardo Kastrup is. He wrote a really interesting book on the metaphysics of Jung's thought. And he does a very good job of talking about, for example, this notion that of the collective unconscious. Well, there's the conscious, the unconscious, personal unconscious, the collective. Well, in the non-dual terms, you could call that God's mind, the unlimited mind.
Yeah.
And he draws a lot of analogies with a non-dual perspective. So there is, I think, a branch of psychology that has gone much further than mainstream psychology. Mainstream psychology doesn't go far at all. Mainstream psychology, and I don't want to be disrespectful, so I am being disrespectful. But I don't think it's not about spirituality. Mainstream psychology is about relieving an individual of their suffering, working on trauma, sort of. It's doing very helpful things, but that's not the psychology I'm interested in, I think, is what I'm trying to say. I think I'm very interested in patterns, the archetypes, in the hidden face God, dare I
Yeah.
say. There is an aspect of God that we actually can shine a light on if we honestly are willing to I don't know, to see that we don't know everything, that our dreams, our life circumstances, our relationships sort of bring up from a realm that's still in the dark elements that can be alchemized with, can be explored, can be wrestled with. And that's the horizontal, because that isn't quickly in one gesture reduced back to my true nature. Or it can, but at that moment you've sat down on the cushion again, and you've turned away from the content of experience, which is absolutely wonderful and beautiful to do, but equally for me valid to swim in the content of experience. And because you're swimming in yourself, you're not, it's not about, as Francis sometimes might say, oh, therapy is rearranging the furniture, but that's just a certain kind of psychotherapy.
Yes.
I know what he means, but anyway,
Yes. I know what you mean. One thing he got me to look at much more deeply was this understanding that we don't choose our thoughts. And yes. I had understood it, and it was perfectly clear, but I had never really felt all the consequences, all the implications of that. And I think one of those implications is that our psychology is not my psychology, the psychology of me, a separate entity. It's not like that at all. As you say, God's infinite mind, the patterns that are arising in that mind. And
as it rises from the infinite mind, it does sort of, the first layer of that is your personal mind. Your very boring, repetitive, chronic thoughts, or your personal enlightened thoughts. But then but you don't choose those thoughts either. But you seem
don't choose
to choose
any.
None of them. But at the more sort of surface level, that's where the belief that I choose my thought is most convincing, you could say, because that's the realm of the ego. That's the realm of and Jung would call it the conscious ego. But then you realize as you investigate that, none of this is chosen by a person, a separate self.
Yes. People sometimes feel and have said to me, I need to get rid of all my body-mind conditioning because it's all getting in the way. All of it needs to be dissolved, and that's why I want enlightenment, because that's what enlightenment's going to do. But that's seems to me a complete misconception.
That definitely. I mean, I can understand the usefulness of the concept of conditioning, but yes, it is I think a misconception.
But a lot of conditioning is helpful. The conditioning that we're frightened if we see a snake on the path in case it might be venomous.
Yes, and let's take that example. So there's the sort of natural conditioning of fear, but then let's say you have a phobic response to snakes, or you dream of snakes. Well, you might want to, so that surface fear of snakes is a conditioning, and you can see that there's a natural part of that conditioning, but there's also a mysterious part to that conditioning because you have a phobia. So then you might want to allow that to, you might consider the possibility that there's something you don't know. There's something from the realm of the unconscious that is trying to come up, and it's taking the shape of this very archetypal image of a snake. And so you might consider, be curious, just So even then the conditioning is mysterious, and it's not like we can just I'm going to take away my condition. Like, who's that one who could possibly do that? You can shine a light on conditioning, but to get rid of conditioning, that sounds like a violence to me.
We'd all be clones, wouldn't we?
It's so boring. So boring.
And there's such beauty and diversity as well. It's what I love about the patterns of the universe. There's
Yes.
patterns of the universe are so diverse, so beautiful, and
Yeah.
the patterns of
I guess,
psychology too.
yes, but there is a case for honesty looking at the conditionings that come from the belief in separation.
Yes,
And
yes,
just, but that doesn't mean getting rid of them. It's just because they will be gotten rid of by the grace of the universal dynamism. But to look at them and to be honest and to feel what they are, and to that, yes, by all means,
yes.
by all means. I mean, I think that is the yoga, right? The yoga is to shine a light on our beliefs and ideas to do with being a separate self.
And
But
I
it's
think that
certainly
becomes much easier when you've really understood that you don't choose
exactly.
your thoughts, because it does away with the idea, oh, I'm a bad person because I'm having these kinds of thoughts or feelings or whatever. It's just what's arising.
Yeah.
It's just the pattern that's arising in my body mind right now, and let's just explore those patterns. What triggers them? Why are they arising? Yeah.
Yes, I mean that's at best, because when you say it, how did you say it? It makes away. It takes care of the feeling I'm bad. I'm
Yes.
having these. But that conditioning, the I'm bad condition, I'm good or I'm bad, is very, very, very deep in our culture, because we're sort of, we're a product still of the sort of biblical Western pre-Christian, but sort of, the God up there, this is good and this is bad. So I think that conditioning, we should be quite honest and realize that it's deep, and it lingers. But I agree with you. I agree with you that when we really deeply, deeply understand the freedom of God's mind, and that I don't generate, I, the separate self, don't choose my thoughts, then it's so liberating.
Yes.
It's so liberating. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about trauma in a previous podcast I did. I was talking with a friend who suffered a very deep trauma very early in life, and it was actually that which led her to a very powerful glimpse, and it started a long spiritual journey, but her sense all the time was that she had to deal with this trauma, and she's gone through many decades of all sorts of therapies and things, and she finally came to the direct path. But I think she's still exploring trauma as well with a trauma therapist. I wonder what your thoughts are about trauma. I mean, some therapists believe that we all have trauma to some extent, and that if we don't recognize it, then that's because it's hidden. I don't know whether that's true.
Well, in regards to your friend and many of my clients, or clients that I've had over the years, sometimes a very violent trauma, sort of, like a sexual abuse, or something that includes the physical body, can precipitate an out of body experience. Because if you are, so as a small child, so I have had many clients who remember sort of hovering above their bodies in a moment of incredible trauma, and as a result have a glimpse, but because they suddenly feel peace and expansion. But thereafter, the spiritual glimpse is inextricably linked to the trauma. And therefore, it's very confusing. And later on, they may have so-called Kundalini experiences, things that are both pointing towards liberation and excruciatingly painful psychologically and physically. And so there, I think there has to be if they're lucky to find a space and maybe a therapist who has an understanding of that, so there can be a sort of parsing out and exploring and integrating both the trauma, integrating into trauma, meaning finishing the work where the feeling can be really digested and understood, and then also understanding the glimpse and separating them in a way, you know. So that's so that's one thing. But then trauma is becoming a word that everybody is using, so it's becoming a little bit murky what it means. I don't really know. I don't know if we all have. I'm sure we all experience. Maybe just being born is a sort of trauma, you know, having to be extricated from the totality. But I think there are degrees, and I don't know that everybody has trauma. But at the same time, I think I really don't know how to answer that question. I think it's not a bad thing to consider if you are a spirit, because spiritual people who are drawn to the spiritual path tend to be people who might have a tendency to spiritual bypass, to want to sort of transcend the human experience. So it might not be a bad idea for somebody who's on the spiritual path, who has been deeply drawn to non-duality, to wonder, have I tried to avoid something in my personal history that was very painful? But if nothing comes to mind, it's not necessary to go digging.
Yes.
If something does come to mind, it might be a good thing to sort of dwell with it a bit, remember it.
There's something called shadow work in some teachings.
Yeah.
And I've never really understood what that is. Can you say anything about that? And is it necessary?
Well, I was just going to finish by saying that, let's say your life circumstance or your relationship or something that is happening in your life triggers a very strong reaction of suffering. And yet you're on the non-dual path. So you think, oh, I'm just going to turn back towards the understanding and come back to my true nature. So that's what you do. But then sure enough, again, trigger situation, strong contraction. I think that if that happens, then it might be the sign that there is so-called shadow work. Shadow work is really drawn from the Jungian approach, and it's been a bit mainstreamed and it's used a little bit casually, but here would be an example where so-called shadow work might be of essence, where you get a feeling that something that has been pushed away or denied or split off is trying to emerge, and it usually, its nature is shadowy because it has been split off. So it might be something that happened in childhood, an unbearable feeling. For example, you were a kid and you felt angry, but you were told, no, you can't be angry. And you felt incredibly angry because something unjust was taking place, but you learned to split off that feeling and push it down. And so that feeling, it has a life of its own. It goes under and it mixes with other things that are down there under. And then it, for example, it mixes with the image of a snake, the archetype of a snake, or in other words, there is this realm down there that is powerful and archetypal, and so there are moments where I think shadow work is necessary, yes, but not necessarily for everybody at all times. But if you know for yourself that you tend to want to go to the light and to peace and to light, which of course is our true nature. So it's paradoxical because it's what we are, but from the point of view of the person or this, sometimes we might be in a bit of a hurry to get there. We are that's what we are. So there's nowhere we don't need to get there, but there might be a tendency to avoid something.
And maybe repetition would be an indication if circumstances like that repeat themselves and the reaction repeats itself, that might be an indication there's something under the surface, perhaps.
Yes, or for example, if you find that and you have to be quite honest, if you find that you're often pointing a finger towards something or have a strong reaction to a certain type of behavior or a certain political character or or a certain something, a phenomenon, and you have a very strong you have aversion to that, you might. I hear your kitty cat. She agrees.
I'm afraid she does.
You might conclude that there's something there that belongs to you. It's called projection in the psychological lingo, but that you've projected something that is unbearable on this other person, on this situation. And it is, if we take the non-dual perspective that there's only one mind, then that thing that you attribute to the other that is unspeakable and really bad, it's yours too. So that's shadow work. It's sort of wrestling with that thing that you feel you're absolutely free of, that you would never feel that way. Well, and it might be very much under. You might really be out of touch with it. So, yeah.
Yes.
That's what the shadow is. It's the thing that you feel you're completely free of, that you tend to project on others.
Yeah.
I do think it. I do. I love that work. I find it keeps you humble. It keeps your mind sort of. It's like an antidote to arrogance, to the arrogance of the spiritual mind that can think it's, once you realize your true nature, everything is taken care of. That's.
I mean, there's something called spiritual ego. People call it spiritual ego. Obviously, ego doesn't exist as an entity, but you know what it means, and it's a feeling of a spiritual I that develops following the recognition of your true nature.
Yeah.
And that's, well, how do we avoid that happening?
That's a really good question. This notion that Francis often talks about, and another teacher, Eric Barret. I can see you sort of. I think your kitty cat is really part of our conversation. This idea,
to knock my light over.
The formulation of not knowing. I think that the trap for the spirit certitude, the spiritual, any form of ego is a position, right? It's a me position that feels like nicely constructed, and I can sort of hide behind it. It defends me, and I can also assert from that position. So it could be anything, right? That's the nature of the ego, and it's a process, as you said. It's not a thing, but as long as we haven't recognized our true nature, the ego really does need quite a lot to sort of consolidate itself and protect from fear and justify its desires and all this stuff. But so once we discover our true nature, there's still a great risk because especially in the non-dual spheres, because the non-dual understanding says, I am that, I am that, I am awareness, I. So to me, the danger is that it's tricky to say that too much because it can be, it's just tricky. It's also very good to say, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know, I don't know. And also the devotional position that even as we recognize that there is not two, therefore in a way, there's nobody to be devoted, nothing to be devoted to. Well, I feel like no, you still devotion, still the feeling I am just this tiny, I'm a wave in the ocean still, because there is still a person, Jenny and Ellen, there's still a person there, albeit it's not a separate self, but there's still a self there, and that self is small.
Yes,
in the
the
context
wave is small. Yeah.
Yes. And so perhaps the antidote to a spiritual ego is to really feel small often and feel you don't know anything often. Or
I'm not convinced by that.
to feel the awe, well, small and not small.
Feel the immensity
Yes, well,
of the universe. Feel
that's what I
the
mean.
expansion,
Therefore, but to
perhaps.
feel the immensity, you have to also feel small, not in a contracted me, but small in the sense of, maybe small is not the right word, but a feeling of awe, a feeling of the limits of the personal mind, that it could
Yes.
never
Yeah.
formulate this mystery, and that the body at times there is no more body, we feel just oneness, and the mind is
Yes.
completely dissolved in understanding. But then when the mind re-arises and the body reawakens, to be aware that mind it's like a wave. It has a shape, it's and a trajectory, and it's not the immensity. It is made out of the immensity, but it isn't. And with the formulations and how we share our understanding and how we live it, I think Francis says that, and I really like that. Life ultimately is a teacher, and however certain we are, clear and aligned, and if she comes and whacks us, she's the one who knows better. if
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
that,
I think.
you get the feeling. I can't coin it, and I'm glad I can't, because I really don't know, but the feeling of humility and
Yes. I think there's a particular danger when people start teaching. I'm aware of that because I don't call myself a teacher, but I do a bit of teaching if I'm asked to. And but if I think about teachers who are do it as a profession, there's
yes,
pressure to earn money. There's all the adulation from followers. There's feeling that you've got to live up to everyone's expectations, to always be
yes,
right, to
that's right.
never
Know
make
everything about
mistakes,
everything.
always appear spiritual the whole time. And it seems to me very, very hard in those circumstances to be free of spiritual ego. And I've thought, just for myself, what can protect us from this. And yes, I think you're right. Humility
Yeah,
has
and
to be, and not knowing, but it's
shadow
that.
work. Shadow work, Jenny, that's where it can come in handy for a spiritual teacher, because
Yeah.
we're all human beings, even if it's not our essential nature, but we do operate in a world, and we have relationships, and we have a past, and we have a childhood, and we had we have conditionings, as we said earlier, and they are going to play out. And if we are under the obligation, as you just said beautifully, if we're under the obligation to operate as a spiritual human being, it's very, very tricky, because unconsciously, it doesn't mean, it's not necessarily a calculated thing, but it's just going to be almost inevitable, especially if we have a large audience. And depending on the conditions, it's going to be inevitable that we're not maybe going to fall in that trap. It's it's so what go ahead, Jenny.
And the other thing I thought about was really spiritual friendships, whether it's with a teacher, a partner, or a community of friends that we've met on our spiritual journey. For me, I think that's important, because we're going back to authenticity. The friends that I choose are those that I feel are authentic. It's what I value in every one of my friends. And a friend isn't a friend if they can't call you out about your own non-authenticity or egoic behavior.
Yeah, and it's not exactly. I think, well, that would be life coming at you and giving you a little wallop in the form of your friend saying, you know what, you're full of in that moment. And then there might be a bit of a wrestling, a little bit of exploring, a little bit of wondering, saying, no, I'm not, and going home and thinking, she mirrored that to me, and maybe there's something there, and just embarking on a little bit of questioning of one's position. Absolutely, I think friends in truth are invaluable, and friendship in general. It's so important to get mirroring from people who are, if we are teachers, that are outside our sort of circle of students.
Yes.
Yeah.
Do you think it's sort of a slightly different subject now, but it's something I've discussed with Bill Free from time to time? Do you feel it's possible that to recognize our true nature without a teacher, just from reading books?
I don't know. That's the first answer, but I have a feeling that the presence of another teacher, or a friend who activates the field. It reminds me of Jesus saying, when two or more are gathered in my name, I will be there. It's like this mysterious alchemy that happens in a relationship where truth is sort of evoked and is brought to life, and it's unexplainable through logic. It's vibrational, so it may include a very higher reasoning teaching, but it's much more than that. It's the field that comes to life. So I remember reading Francis because before I met Francis, this guy in California, this friend of mine, he'd say, "Oh, you have to meet Francis," and he would give me books, and I would read, and I'd be like, "Yeah." And then I didn't see Francis, but I heard his voice, and I swear it wasn't just what I heard, it was his voice. Now, what's that about? And then I went to meet Francis, and it was very powerful, and it was not just his words. So I would tend to think no. And then later on, other people in this more psychological endeavors, that the ones I spoke to in the beginning, that are not just sort of rearranging the furniture, but the sort of deep relaxing into the mind at large, at the collective mind, or the there too, the presence of an analyst is, it's not just another person there that's going to tell you things and draw connection. It's extremely vibrant and mysterious. So I would tend to think not. I think you could get quite far, or maybe you could read a book and then have a very powerful experience with an invisible other.
Yes,
like
yes.
something you read would have would really constellate something beyond the words you're reading.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the title of this series of podcasts, "Living in Not Knowing," that was from a quote that I read from Jean Klein: "Live in not knowing, free from memory." And I read that just at the point where I had left the traditional path that I was following, and progressive path, and was looking where to go next, and had started to look at the direct path. But somehow that sentence, it meant such a lot for me, but I couldn't understand it on my own. I knew intuitively that this was really so important, that it was kind of the key to almost everything for me. And it was only when I finally met Francis that I got a very clear explanation of all the sort of dimensions of that. And I did a whole podcast on it, in fact, in this series with him, which was lovely. But it was interesting. It does seem to be that almost a combination of words and that direct transmission. I found.
And in your case, Jenny, because you're a scientist, I don't know if you're a scientist, but you definitely, your mind is very powerful and complex. It can think in many, many ways about things. So I'm not surprised that with Francis, he was shining a light on all the corners of your mind that might need help letting go of a little, argument, or wanted, all the lines of reasonings had to be sort of illumined, and Francis would have done that brilliantly. Whereas in my case, because I'm not like that, I'm not very rational. That's why I'm always worried about these podcasts, because I'm thinking, oh my God, how am I going to? But it's not that I'm not able to think, but it's not rational. So for me, it was more his voice. It was also his words, but it was also something about the tactility, the way, and it's not about Francis in the end, but to begin with, it's very, very much about also the way Francis would look out into the far horizon. I remember just the way he looked had such a transmissive effect on me, the way sometimes there would be a pause and a silence, and it was so powerful. And it can still be powerful. I even though I know there is not any, they're not two.
Yeah.
Relationship in the one is so precious. I mean, so beautiful. This way that truth can speak to itself through all our body minds, and all the ways that can make silence sing, so many ways.
Yes. I've noticed that you are increasingly mentioning not knowing in your teaching, which I didn't hear earlier, years and years ago, together in Oxford. And I wonder what living in not knowing means for you now.
I I don't know. It's a good question. I think recently, because of certain, personal difficult transitions, I had to attend to difficult experiences in myself and my human experience, and my non-dual understanding was a little bit challenged because I suffered. I suffered.
Yes. Yeah.
And then and it was difficult because I thought, well, does that mean I'm back in ignorance? And then I decided, no, I'm going to trust this suffering and not know. I'm going to postpone everything, even the non-dual, because at heart I know that I'm a truth lover. So, but I'm going to postpone even that, and I'm just going to see how this plays out. And I did go to very dark corners. But I trusted, and I didn't know, was I going to sort of sink back into sort of dense suffering, and and I don't think I have, and I feel I'm emerging with. It's not that I'm emerging with, I know. It's more that I'm emerging with, I know what I don't know is more.
Yes.
I can still reach for the lines of reasonings, and I can still reach for the feeling understanding of my true nature. But I can now also sort of surrender more. I don't know if more. It's not done. I think it will be forever more surrender. And the surrendering is the not knowing. I know this is probably hard for your more logical way of thinking. Like, I know I'm speaking in very rational ways. I'm hoping some people can sort
It's
of
beautiful, Ellen.
It's hard for me. Hard for everyone to put words to these things.
Yes, it is. I think of words as just a kind of tuning in mechanism. Words are not. They don't really tell the story. The tuning in mechanism is where the minds meet, and where the shared understanding arises, which is beyond words.
That's nice. Yeah, like that. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Ellen, for your really beautiful insights. And it's been lovely talking with you. And thank you all for listening.
Thank you so much, Jenny. You're very nice to talk to too. And bye, everyone.